Good day and welcome to a very warm welcome to this July edition of the Charlotte Maxeke Dialogues. We have since the beginning of the year, 2021, on the occasion of celebrating 150 years since the birth of this pioneer, been having these dialogues on a month-to-month basis, focusing on different aspects of the life of this amazing pioneering woman. We looked at her history, we looked at her role in the church, we looked at her role as a social worker, we looked at her role as a community building, as an educationist, and since we still have a couple of months left of the year, we have many different aspects to cover. The Charlotte Maxeke Institute has been running these programs throughout the year, in addition to the dialogues, also to look at how do we, in the words of Mom Charlotte Maxeke, bring up young people, advance the cause of young women and as well as young boys, and more generally to look at the example that this amazing woman has played and the role that she played in our society, but not just in South African society, she's also an African icon as well as a global icon. The July dialogue is very special because in the dialogue we're looking at, in a sense, two South African icons, Charlotte Maxeke as well as Nelson Mandela. Our very esteemed panel for the dialogue today will be using different examples of the similarities between these two icons, but also the difference that they face in terms of the times that they led the struggles, but also during the differences as a woman, the differences as someone that grew up in a particular circumstances. We look forward to those reflections from our esteemed panelists. We will be doing more of these dialogues every last Thursday of the month. So we look forward to this Nelson Mandela, Charlotte Maxeke dialogue. And in August, September, October, November, there will be more of that. And we look forward to you joining us to learn from this about this woman, to reflect on the 150 years since her birth, and at the end of the day to then see what lessons we can learn for today and for the future of South Africa. Thank you very much, and I now hand over to our program director.
Good day to everyone viewing our dialogue today. My name is Zuleika Patel. I am an activist, an author, and a student, and an ambassador to the Institute. And I will be doing a reading of one of the remarks that Nelson Mandela had about Charlotte Maxeke, as well as a reading from the book Beauty of the Heart, which is about the life and times of Charlotte Maxeke, and it is authored by Zubeida Jaffer. As I begin, I quote, "I invite you to join me in my admiration of Charlotte Maxeke's contributions and achievements in championing women's rights and the promotion of women in the sphere of social welfare, most especially education field in South Africa. There are many things we continue to learn from the life of Charlotte Maxeke. From her, we have learned that one can be a leader and remain humble. From her, we have learned that you can be a leader and still respect others in actions and deeds, regardless of their status in life. From her, we have learned that one can be educated and remain sensitive to the needs of those who are less privileged. From her, we have learned that leadership is about sacrifice, selflessness, and commitment. It is through her work that she cared for all, the elderly, the church, the youth, the homeless, the rural poor, and ordinary folk. close quote. Those are the remarks that Nelson Mandela had to share about Mam Charlotte Maxeke, him being someone who had an admiration for education, as well as her being one of the first the first black female graduate in Southern Africa. And now I will read an extract from Beauty of the Heart. As always, Charlotte stood out, ahead of her time, and represented all South African women at the formation of an organization that was to withstand the test of time and become acknowledged as the oldest liberation movement on the continent. It had emerged from the mobilization that had been happening since the 1800s, particularly after the formation of the pre-Disca Cape-based South African Native Congress, or Ingqungquthela, in 1891, and now finally a national movement of the oppressed announced itself here to stay. On the 8th of January 1912 in Bloemfontein, the new movement was named the South African National Native Congress and renamed the African National Congress in 1923. It was the organization, amongst others, that survived the long haul to bring political freedom to all South Africans. To the vast number of South Africans, nothing has ever come on a silver platter. They had to fight for every little bit of the many rights they enjoy today. After more than 80 years, they ended the political stranglehold of the offspring of two former colonial countries that claimed their right to South Africa exclusively. Despite this victory, the cultural and economic dominance of the colonial imprint continues to loom large. Restoring this part of the world to its natural balance will require another monumental effort to create an equitable economic system and bringing the cultural norms confined to the privacy of the home to the center of public life. This movement for change is slowly beginning to gain a greater momentum. Looking back from our vantage point of today, we have concluded that the Constitution set in motion in 1912 was moderate. It outlined 5 basic aims. 1, to promote unity and mutual cooperation between the government and the South African black people. 2, to maintain a channel between the government and the black people. 3, to promote the social, educational, and political upliftment of the black people. 4, to promote understanding between chiefs and loyalty to the British Crown and all lawful authorities. 5, to promote understanding between white and black South Africans. The radicalization of the ANC program was to come much later as urbanization grew, providing the platform for the emergence of a modern urban-based nationalist mass movement capable of challenging the power of the repressive apartheid state. This piece from the book is unique to today's dialogue, given that Nelson Mandela was once the president of the African National Congress, and they too both share a link as having both been leaders within the African National Congress. Thank you.
Good morning, Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Bam, distinguished guests, and everyone online who's watching us this morning. My name is Zozo Mhango. I am the Professor of Jurisprudence currently, and I'll be joining the Department of Public Law as a Professor and Head of Department next week. I am here to introduce the Vice-Chancellor. It is an honor for me to introduce the Vice-Chancellor because I know him since the Wits University days. So Professor Tawana Cooper has been the Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria since January 2019. He holds a master's degree in English from the University of Zimbabwe and a PhD in Media Studies from the University of Oslo, Norway. An honorary doctorate in humanities was also bestowed on him by Michigan State University in December 2019. As I've said, prior to his appointment at UP, he held several senior positions at the University of Witwatersrand, WITS, in Johannesburg, serving as Vice Principal, Deputy Vice Chancellor for Advancement, Human Resources and Transformation, Deputy Vice Chancellor for Finance and Operations, and Executive Dean of the Faculty of Humanities. Professor Kupe was also the founding head of the Media Studies Department at Wits University. Prior to his tenure at Wits, he filled various academic capacities at Rhodes University and the University of Zimbabwe. He is an international council member of the International Association for Media and Communication Research, an active member of several civil society organizations, including the Amabungane Center for Investigative Journalism, and is chairman of the Board of Media Monitoring Africa. Prof. Kupe is also a member of the Council of the International Association of Media and Communication Research and the Association of Commonwealth Universities Council. He has authored several journal articles, books, and book chapters on media studies and journalism, and is a sought-after speaker and regular commentator on media performance issues on radio, television, and in print publications, both locally and internationally. Professor Kupe has also been a columnist for several newspapers and magazines in South Africa. In 2021, he was appointed as a member of the National Advisory Council on Innovation, the Advisory Committee for the South African SDG Policy Support Initiative, and the Advisory Board for the Global Handbooks in Media and Communication Research Series. Welcome, Professor Tawana Kupe, and I leave the floor to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and a warm welcome to everyone here today. As we reach the end of the Mandela month and head into August, a month in South Africa dedicated to commemorating women and their fight for equality, I can think of no better way to honor the memory and impact of the esteemed Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela and Charlotte Manya Maxeke than by engaging in this dialogue on a legacy of service. Thank you to the Charlotte Manya Maxeke Institute, as well as the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, for including the University of Pretoria as a partner in hosting this important conversation, which dovetails so completely with our vision as an educational institution to educate and train the next generation of leaders to play a pivotal role in transforming lives and communities. The University of Pretoria is built on a foundation of excellence and change. And in addition to enhancing access to successful student learning and sustaining a transformed, inclusive, and equitable university community, one of our key strategic goals is to strengthen the university's social consciousness and its impact on society. Universities cannot be an island in themselves in our societies. Nelson Mandela said, and I quote, "There is still too much discord, hatred, division, conflict, and violence in our world. It is so easy to break down and destroy. The heroes are those who make peace and build." While these words were spoken decades ago, they seem particularly apt as we reflect on the recent spate of unrest in our country. We face vulnerable times and urgently need to consider leadership principles which we can put into practice to address these and other challenges in our society. We live in the age of disruptions. In the midst of the discord we saw and are still seeing, the heroes, the thousands of active citizens who have made selfless contributions to restore peace, ordinary people serving as leaders in extraordinary ways, and instilling hope that what has been lost will be restored. As they engaged in their communities, the words of Madame Maxeke resounded, and I quote, "This work is not for yourselves. Kill the spirit of self and do not live lives above your people, but live with them. And if you can rise, bring someone with you, end quote. The impact of the unparalleled icons we are celebrating today lives on, and there is much we can learn from their leadership traits and style. Leadership can be described as a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal or outcome. The definition of a leader and the qualities they demonstrate has evolved over the past centuries, with researchers proposing various methodologies ever since the term arose in the lexicon in the 19th century, although the concept itself is as old as time. We cannot recognize a good leader when we see one, but pinning down their characteristics and practices has proved difficult. In fact, the one consensus reached is that there are many differing views on the subject. Are great leaders defined by their accomplishments, or is it dependent on the appraisal of their followers? Is nature or nurture the more important factor in determining success? Can leadership be learned, or is there a magical combination of trait, behavior, and situation or context, if you like, that allows leaders to rise to the occasion? Concepts in leadership have certainly changed since the 6th century, when the legendary King Arthur pulled the sword from the stone, illustrating his divine right to be king of Britain. Mythological heroes like Odysseus and others like Alexander the Great earned their distinctions in battles won against nearly insurmountable odds, and authors like Plato, Lao Tzu, and even Machiavelli built on what was later termed the great man theory. That history is shaped by the personal attributes of great men, with no mention of women at this point. This view cemented an autocratic leadership style, which has very much been the norm until just a few decades ago. In 1970, an American executive named Robert K. Greenleaf published an essay entitled The Servant as Leader, articulating the leadership philosophy in which the goal of the leader is to serve, and that instead of the people working to serve the leader exists to serve the people. Since the turn of the century, servant or service-driven leadership has been popularized in software development through the Scrum and Agile management methodologies, and according to a 2002 study, a number of top-ranking companies have reached their status because of their servant leadership style and following. Of course, this was the leadership style adopted by Madame Maxeke long before it was popularized. Throughout her career as a social and political activist, she sought to represent the grievances of a largely poor and rural base, from her founding of the Bantu Women's League through to her anti-pass involvement, including the protest she led of 700 women who marched to the Bloemfontein City Council, where they bent their passes. This colossus woman, who was ahead of her times in so many ways, was described as being self-confident, empathetic, courageous, responsible, honest, consistent, and humble, characteristics that made others want to follow her. In her leadership style, she portrayed absolute clarity. There was no questioning her vision of achieving freedom, equality, and education. This was paired with decisiveness. Once she made up her mind, it was all hands on the deck. The father of our nation, Madiba, displayed similar traits, modeling the very essence of service-driven leadership in action. Mandela is said to have loved to reminisce about his boyhood and his afternoon herding khaki, later using the analogy that a leader is like a shepherd. He stays behind the flock, letting the most nimble go out ahead, whereupon the others follow, not realizing that all along they are being directed from behind. He used this approach in his focus on the importance of community building and empowering others to lead social change. Of course, Mandela is well recognized for his ethical stand, charisma, endurance, and communication skills. And we will no doubt delve into other aspects of his and Madam Maxeke's leadership as we dialogue further. The South African government, having instituted 2021, or rather declared 2021, as the year of Charlotte Maxeke, and as we mark that, what would have been her 150th birthday, There can perhaps be no better time in our history than now to focus on a call to service-driven leadership as we seek to revive our communities and bring others up through prioritizing the needs of others and our land, and to together build the future we want to see. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kupe, for your kind remarks on traits of leadership. I would like to first thank also Ms. Febe Potgieter-Kubule and Ms. Zuleika Patel for their remarks earlier. Right now, we are going on a video message on the legacy of service from the Nelson Mandela Foundation Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Selo Hatang. Is a Nelson Mandela Foundation Chief Executive Officer. Thank you.
Greetings from the Nelson Mandela Foundation. As recent events in South Africa have demonstrated, the question of leadership is of fundamental importance. More than ever, we need the qualities of leadership demonstrated by Ms. Charlotte Maxeke and Nelson Mandela. Of course, both of them set a very high bar for good leadership, but their attributes of leadership are available to everyone, whether they be the head of state or school principal, captains of industry, or superintendents of hospitals. Much has been said about Nelson Mandela as a leader and about his leadership style. In the very few minutes available to me, I want to reflect on those attributes of leadership which have loomed large in my own experience of Madiba and from my close reading of his personal archive. These are attributes which I believe are needed urgently in the second decade of the 21st century. The first quality I would mention is the seemingly innocuous one of consistency. For Madiba, this was a fundamental attribute of leadership. As he wrote in an undated notebook entry, leadership falls into two categories: those who are inconsistent, whose actions cannot be predicted, who agree today on a major issue and repudiate it the following day; those who are consistent, who have a sense of honor, a vision. I need not elaborate on the need for leaders guided by principle rather than expedience. A second important quality describes an absence, the absence of what I would call an over-eagerness to be the leader. Too often, we see ambition spurring men and women to reach for power, to rush to the top. Madiba exemplifies a very different approach. After his release from prison, he was pressed into service as a leader. He had to be persuaded to accept a collective decision for him to become the first post-apartheid president. And he says, I advised against the decision on the grounds that I would turn 76 that year, that it would be wise to get a far younger person, male or female, who had been out of prison, met heads of state and government, attended meetings of world and regional organizations, who had kept abreast of national and international developments, close quote. A third and closely related quality is the determination not to outstay one's welcome. Is it not absurd to see leaders hanging on to office well into their 80s and 90s? Having been persuaded to accept the presidency, Madiba immediately announced publicly that he would step down after just one term. And unlike others who make such announcements, he did what he said he would do. others change constitutions, and others just stay because they can. The last quality I want to highlight is accountability. A good leader gives account to those who have put him or her into a leadership position. And a good leader holds all levels of leadership accountable. As Madiba said in 1990, accountability of leaders to the rank and file, and the accountability of members to the structures to which they are affiliated is the flip side of the coin of democracy. Close quote. Madiba is gone, but his voice lives on. Charlotte Maxeke is gone, but her voice lives on. May we always listen to them. May we continue to be inspired by them, to keep going, to keep reaching higher, and may we become those leaders that they would be proud of. I thank you.
Good day again. My name is Zozo Mhango, as I have said, and I'm the program director for this second session. So we are here today to talk about the Charlotte Maxeke and Nelson Mandela, a legacy of service dialogue. The South African government has earmarked year 2021 as the year of Charlotte Maxeke in commemoration of the 150th anniversary of her birth in Fort Beaufort, Eastern Cape. The Charlotte Maxeke Institute's theme for the year is Bring Others Up. This is a call to focus on service-driven leadership and the revival and uplifting of our communities across the country through active citizenry that seeks to contribute positively to the spaces we occupy. Charlotte Maxeke was an iconic, unparalleled colossus of a woman who was ahead of her time. She moved effortlessly from politics to religion, education, community development, and to women empowerment. Her interests were always tied to excellence and extending herself to others, which led to her serving her country in groundbreaking ways. In her memory and in commemoration of the enormous contributions she has made to South Africa, the Charlotte Maxeke Institute has planned a series of programs that highlight the preservation of her legacy, promote her teachings, advance the values she stood for, and elevate her name. Mr. Thulasizwe Makhanya, who's here with us today, chairperson of the Charlotte Maxeke Institute, says, women have always been at the forefront, leading the fight for the emancipation of our country and continent in all our movements. And it is time for history to restore their legacies to its rightful place. So I'm very happy we also have another giant of South Africa with us today, Dr. Bam, who will also talk to us soon. So the hashtags on this, one of them is hashtag Bring Others Up and hashtag Year of Charlotte Maxeke. So please, if you're on social media, you can use those hashtags to communicate with us. So to begin this dialogue, we are going to start with the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Minister Nathi Mthethwa, who's going to talk to us about the legacy of service when it comes to these two giants of South Africa. So over to you, Minister Mthethwa.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Professor Jani Mango, thank you so much to the members of the Maxeke and Mandela families, former President, President Kgalema Motlanthe. The Nelson Mandela Foundation has been represented by its CEO, Mr. Silo Atang, to the members of Charlotte Maxeke Institute, members of the private sector, civil society, faith-based organizations here present, the National Heritage Council and other partners, members of the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture institutions, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings to you all in this very historic year of 150 years of Mama Charlotte Maxeke. It is a special honor for me to participate in an occasion that relives, reflects, remembers, and recreates the contributions and the perspective of Mama Charlotte Maxeke in relation to President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, whose month is it that we are celebrating his day in the month of July. We've gathered here today to continue the process of celebrating the 150 years of Mama Charlotte Maxeke, having a conversation with President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, and understanding Madiba, who was a keen listener and appreciative of the contribution made by generations who came before him. He would have sat by the feet of Mama Charlotte Maxeke, listening to her narrating stories of brave warrior men and women who went to battle in defense of our freedom. Chairperson, Program Director, I know this. I know this to be true because President Mandela, in his statement from the dock during the Rivonia trial, makes the following assertion, and I quote, "In my youth in the Transkei, I listened to the elders of my tribe telling stories of the old days. Amongst the tales they related to me were those of wars fought by our ancestors in defense of our fatherland. The names of Dingane, of Bamba and Bambata, Yinza and Makana, Skungati and Talasile, Mushweshwe and Sikukuni were praised as the glory of the entire African nation. I hope then that life might offer me the opportunity to serve my people and make my own humble contribution to their freedom struggle," close quote. Today, we too recognize that it is out of this rich history of our struggle against colonial oppression that then emerges a tradition of liberation. Walter Benjamin, in his thesis on the philosophy of history, observes that, and I quote, "As flowers turn towards the sun, by the dint of secret heliotropism, the past strives to turn towards the sun, which is rising in the sky of history. A historical materialist must be aware of this most inconspicuous of all transformations." And he goes on to explain that history is the subject of a structure whose side is not homogeneous, empty time, but time filled by the presence of the now. Thus, the Robespierre ancient Rome was a past charged with time of the now, which he blasted out of the continuum of history, close quote. Program Director, it is with a similar understanding that we reflect on the contributions of our leaders who, each in his or her own historical time, sought not self-aggrandizement, but only to work tirelessly and collectively in quest for the liberation and beyond. Therefore, the mandate I received in coming to participate here today has been to contribute to presidential dialogues that relive reflect, remember, and recreate the 4 R's, Mayor Charlotte Maxeke's legacy. Her mission, beliefs, and teachings through conversation with President Mandela so as to help us understand the woman, her work, and the call she left behind for all of us. Madiba would have listened carefully to a woman who, amongst others, became the first to serve in the Royal Council under King Jongilizwe Sampu Dalindyebo of Abatembu, father of King Sabata Jonguhlanga Dalindyebo. This is the Royal Council that Madiba himself is very familiar with too. He grew up in that royal household. Mayor Maxeke of the Bantu Women's League, the forerunner of the ANC Women's League, would have engaged the president of the ANC about the following in my analysis, program director, of her potential train of thought and viewpoints. 1, the exclusion of women from membership and leadership of the from the membership and the leadership of the mainstream African National Congress. The dire condition in which African women were treated by the colonial society as colonial subjects, as Africans, as women, and as working people. The dire implications of the land question on families, women, children, and the economy arising from the massive dispossession of Africans from the land of their ancestors, and the historical duty of progressive forces not to acquiesce. Should have warned of the consequence of this struggle not being fought by both women and men. The dire implications of the escalating segregation, enforcement of the Job Reservation Act, acceleration of the migrant labor system, the destruction of African participation in industry and trade. In my thinking, I think she would have raised sharply the negative impacts of the denial of access to quality and advanced education for African girl child, all socially tolerated practices that deny the African girl, especially the girl child, equal opportunity to advance. She would have queried the increasing power of quislings and petty chiefs that do the bidding for the colonial administration and instead of campaigning for the representative participatory government of the people. I contend she would have queried the generational impact of the social and economic policies of her time, demanded an equitable share in the economy and implementation measures to achieve equity and redress, measures to assert the dignity of Africans in particular and all humans in general. In contesting each of the above and many other issues, should have queried the methodology, the tone, and the vigor of the engagement. Should have wanted equitable participation of women, and she would have wanted less reformist approaches. Mayor Maxeke was clearly a visionary, well ahead of her times in more ways than one. Statements from her writings confirm this. Having listened to Maxeke, Madiba would have responded in a manner that says, "We will not betray the cause of freedom and social justice." President Mandela would have taken the lessons from Maxeke to heart. He remained truthful to the commitment of his revolutionary duty and to his organization, the African National Congress, on matters related or relating to women's emancipation. He dedicated the rest of his life to ending oppression wherever it raised its ugly head. He did that because Madiba understood the nexus of all forms of oppression. And at the opening of the first parliament in 1994, President Mandela declared, and I quote, "Freedom cannot be achieved unless women have been emancipated from all forms of oppression. Our endeavors must be about the liberation of the woman, the emancipation of the man, and the liberty of the child." He continues to say that as long as women are bound by poverty and as long as they are looked down upon, human rights will lack substance. As long as outmoded ways of thinking prevent women from making a meaningful contribution to society, progress will be slow, he added, close quote. And through force of example, the following strides were made under Madiba's leadership. On gender agenda, he recognized earlier on in his presidency that no major success was possible without gender equality. On constitutional justice, for Madiba, democracy and gender equality were far from separate issues. In 1995, at the time of drafting of the South African Constitution, he said, and I quote, "As a tribute to the legions of women who navigated the path of fighting for justice before us, we ought to imprint in the supreme law of the land firm principles upholding the rights of women." Close quote. I hope that to all who participate in these historic reflections, these are not just celebratory ceremonies, but decisive efforts to create perpetual knowledge edifice that changed the trajectory of South African and humanity's heritage in regard to contributions of women to a better humanity. This should result not just in honoring, and I know this is the object of the institute, that it should not just be in honoring women of years gone by, but should result in improvements in the condition of contemporary women and girls, and should result in the defeat of the pandemic of gender-based violence and femicide forever. For the quest to be free, the struggle to be fully emancipated is written into the identity of all revolutionary figures who have peopled our history, who have sacrificed their lives for us, and whose batons we hold in our hands, not to admire, but to take further in order to change the lives of our people for the better. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Tetwa. Thank you so much for your remarks about the legacy of service of these two great South Africans, Mayor Charlotte Maxeke and President Mandela. I particularly liked the fact that you have quoted President Mandela saying, "Freedom cannot be achieved without the advancement of women." And I believe that this is still true even today. We need to make sure that women are advanced in order to also live on the legacy of Maxeke, and also on this year's theme, which is bring others up, by the Charlotte Maxeke's Institute. So right now we going to come to the conversation with the panel members on here with me in the studio. I'm going to briefly say a bit about each of them. I'm not going to say a lot because their CVs are very long, otherwise we're going to take a lot of time. So we have Dr. Tozama April Maduma, who's a historian and senior curator at the National Heritage and Cultural Studies Center, University of Fort Hare. She wrote a thesis on Maxeke. The thesis title was or is Theorizing Women, the Intellectual Contributions of Charlotte Maxeke to the Struggle for Liberation in South Africa. I would love to read that thesis. I'm sure it's very interesting. And then we have Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, who's a senior research fellow at the Center for the Advancement of Scholarship here at the University of Pretoria. But he's been many things other than just being the senior research fellow. He's been in the leadership of 3 universities here at UP, UNISA, and elsewhere. Because I don't see where I wrote that now. But he's not just a senior research fellow. And then we have Dr. Brigalia Bam, who's the former chairperson of the Independent Electoral Commission. I know I used to watch Dr. Bam when it's time for elections. We're going to miss you this year because you won't be on TV under the banner of the IEC. And she's also the chairperson of the Board of Trustees of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. And she's more than that, but we're just going to leave it there. And we had, of course, a minister who just gave us the remarks on the legacies of Charlotte Maxeke and Nelson Mandela. So just to start the conversation, and I'm going to start with you, Dr. April Maduma, and then followed by Professor Maluleke and then Dr. Bam. For opening remarks, please talk to us about Mayor Charlotte Maxeke and President Mandela's legacy of service and how these could be defined. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Program Director, distinguished guests, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to participate in this dialogue, and I also wish to extend a word of gratitude to the organizers of this dialogue, for quite often at times we forget about the hard intellectual labor that goes into the making of events of this nature. And I also wish to commend the team that made it possible for us to be here today. With that being said, now I've been asked to comment on the legacy of Ma Charlotte Maxeke and Dada Nelson Mandela, both iconic leaders who made an interminable mark in the history of humankind. They were both leaders under trying conditions who carried the hopes and aspirations of society. Through their strides, they made it possible for us to imagine the unimaginable. They enable us to conceive the unconceivable. With that few remarks, I am going to dwell on Ma Charlotte Maxeke, whom I've been asked to deliberate on. What was Ma Charlotte Maxeke's legacy? And in thinking about her, and in trying to capture the essence of what I think are the traits of her legacy, she is someone I've titled my talk around a theme, Charlotte Maxeke, she who gave her all in pursuance of freedom and in service to others. Mama Maxeke dedicated her life, her entire life, servicing others. This theme is inspired by the words of none other than Mahatma Gandhi, who asserted that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service of others. These words are true when we think about Mama Maxeke. Her legacy of service set the bar for African women so high that even the knowledge system that have sought to erase and obliterate her historical agency could no longer do so. Maxeke excelled in so many respects. that she reorients our understanding of some of the foundational narratives that have rendered the history of this country to us. Now, this could be a topic for another dialogue altogether, how Mama Maxeke helped us to conceive of some of the foundational narratives that help us understand our historical past. In her strides, she inspires us to imagine the unimaginable. I have already cited that. But how do we begin to place Maxeke in the history? Not only of South Africa, but a general history that hasn't been written quite extensively is that of a generation of black intellectuals, whom I call black diasporic thinkers and activists, whose actions traversed the Atlantic Basin in so many ways. So when we begin to think about Mama Maxeke, she was a political activist, but also a thinker, someone who in her own actions was part of a larger movement of thinkers who developed some of the ideals that were to nurture struggles against slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. She participated in the networks that carried and sustained visions of freedom struggles. In her struggles, she gave her all in pursuance of freedom. Like many of her contemporaries, Mama Maxeke understood that the ideals of freedom and fraternity espoused in Western democracies excluded the colonized. Now, when we begin to place her in her historical time, she is someone who was in sync with the conditions of her time. Quite often, we describe her as someone who was ahead of her time, yet she wasn't. She was in sync with the material conditions of her time. To use Lisa Low's words in her book, Intimacies of Two Continents, who asserts that liberal democracies developed in Europe espouse freedoms for men in some parts of the world, while relegating others to backward and temporal geographical spaces that are unfree, backward, and uncivilized, close quote. This was the struggle that Maxeke's generation took. They were struggling against a conception of democracy that rendered the African continent as unfree, backward, and uncivilized. And this narrative, Lisa continues to state, is based on a narrative that freedom can overcome enslavement, but while acknowledging that liberal democracies denied colonial slavery and also erased some of the injustices such as the seizure of land from indigenous people. Law concludes that social inequalities of our times are a legacy of the processes through which the human is freed by liberal forms, while other subjects, practices, and geographies are placed at a distance from the human. So this is what really inspires me about Mama Maxeke's legacy. Like many of her contemporaries who were dedicated to freeing the human. Now, as I've indicated earlier on, that she was part of a generation that was in sync with their realities. What were the material conditions of Maxeke's time? Born in the 1870s, at a time when the very idea of education did not allow Africans to acquire higher education. So this is where we begin to trace Mama Maxeke's legacy and dedication to education. That it was a kind of inspiration she drew, not only from other parts of the world, but out of her own kind of experience. Now, born at a time where educational facilities were still scanty, she understood that education is not value-free, but is driven by the ideological orientation of the ruling class. During Maxeke's time, education was in the hands of missionaries. They established schools to facilitate the propagation of Christianity. Maxeke herself was a product of missionary education. But that was the kind of education that had sought to domesticate her. Now, out of that experience, Maxeke developed a unique relationship with education, knowing very well that we needed an education system that would embrace humanity in its totality. So Maxeke's legacy of education was driven by her concrete material conditions. Now, unfortunately, I have run out of time. I would have loved to dwell much on Mama Maxeke's legacy, that she is someone, I see her as someone who reorients, she redefined the terrain of political struggles in more than one way. Very much early in the earlier 20th century, Maxeke reorientated the terrain of liberation struggle, citing the ordinary, the day-to-day struggles, which is where much of her legacy is based. She is someone who was very much grounded to the concrete material conditions of the community and society at large. That is the kind of leadership that Mama Maxeke, the kind of leadership qualities she exuded. With those few words, I thank you.
Very few words indeed. I should have told my panel members that I'm going to give you 5 minutes each because we still have some things to talk about. So these were just opening remarks. So thank you so much with those remarks, opening remarks that you have made. We have learned a lot from them. And we're still going to probe you more on about Charlotte Maxeke. Now, over to you, Professor Maluleke, to please give us your opening remarks. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I feel really honored to be sitting next to a Maxeke expert.
Yes.
And also, on my other hand, I'm sitting next to Sislope, whose wisdom and knowledge of history and leadership I have treasured for a long, long time. It strikes me that when Charlotte Maxeke was born, the controversy about the exact year notwithstanding, the Swiss missionaries who evangelized my village were just alighting from the ox wagons and arriving in my village to start their work of evangelization and to build a school and so on. And it speaks to the times in which Maxeke was born. There is no doubt that Mandela and Maxeke, both of them left huge legacies, which is a pity when I look at the program today. I hope that the program that was sent to me is the old one, because in the program that was sent to me, it speaks of President Nelson Mandela and Charlotte Maxeke. When in fact it could have spoken about Nelson Mandela and Charlotte Maxeke without titles, or speak about President Nelson Mandela and President Charlotte Maxeke, because she was the president of the Bantu Women's League herself. And I also don't think we should blame her for the fact that the South African National Congress made a huge mistake in 1912 when they met in Bloemfontein on the 8th of January, when they did not elect the only woman in attendance, by some accounts, being Charlotte Maxeke, as president, first president of the African National Congress. I say this because she had all the qualifications in terms of talent, in terms of probity, in terms of charisma, in terms of knowledge, education, more than most, if not more than the men who were gathered there. So let's not blame her for that, because it's not her fault. She could easily have walked into that position and excelled in it. By the time Nelson Mandela burst onto the political scene, which is in the late 40s via the student and youth politics of the 1940s, Maxeke had died in 1931. But it's also important to note that when Mandela was being born in 1918, she was already president of the BWL, which she had just established at that time. And that's the kind of age gap that exists between them, but also the kind of way in which she was quite advanced in terms of her own leadership. Now, what are the exact legacies that they left for us? Well, they left us a legacy of service to humanity in general. My colleague has already said that, because the two of them were arguably the most internationally impactful ANC leaders in their times. Maxeke left a huge impact in the UK, where she went as a chorister, and then in the US, where she arrived at a time of intellectual germination, a kind when ideas were cooking, a time when ideas were cooking in America, when she arrived there as a student. And on both continents, she left quite a huge impact. Nelson Mandela, there's no need to even try to explain how huge a global impact he had. So that's one legacy. The other legacy that they left us is the legacy of service to their chosen organizations. In case of Maxeke, the Bantu Women's League, the Council of African Women, the African Methodist Church, AME, and of course the South African National Congress. In case of Mandela, it was the ANC. So both of them left out a service to those organizations that they chose for themselves. Very selfless service. Am I done with my 5 minutes? I can stop here. I can say other things later.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can say one more thing.
Okay. Only one more thing. Yes. So, and I think if you look at the kind of leadership that legacy that they left us, both of them, although that almost touches into the next conversation, is that it was leadership by example. In other words, they both led by being that which they wish others to become. Now, this may sound trite, but it's actually a huge legacy to leave. Because they didn't just go about telling people, do this, be like that, or else. They were that which they wanted people to become. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Maluleke. And I remembered the other institution, it was University of Johannesburg. Thank you for those points that you have made. We now know that Maxeke was also not one-dimensional. She was a chorister, she was an intellectual thinker, she was a global icon, and she was way older than Nelson Mandela, but they had some things in common. Over to you, Dr. Bam, to please have your opening remarks on the legacies of these two giants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. One of the things that they left behind was the tradition of what you call the oral tradition, where Mandela would, on many occasions, abandon his notes that he had prepared. And I'm doing exactly that this morning. Because we have these wonderful panelists here who have done studies, and prior to them, several people who spoke already, I think, have identified very clearly those kinds of things. Permit me first to say thank you to the people who organized this, and thank you to the university and to the Vice Chancellor, I do want again publicly to say that this university has a tradition, an amazing tradition of supporting activities and supporting women in all their endeavors that they do. Many years ago, we came to this university and we worked in partnership as SAWID, South African Women in Dialogue. So impressed was this university and so supportive that at the end of this relationship, which I hope will never end, we will continue the relationships with this university. It's important that I say that to you, because it is clear that as we prepare for the future and as we look at the legacy of these people, we need to look more and more to not only just women, but also to the graduates that are coming from our universities today. I think with a full appreciation of the certificates that they get. But maybe we need to think a little more, those of us who are outside as grandmothers and others of another generation. Thank you for that support. I have been thinking that perhaps what we might engage in later is what would Mandela and what would Charlotte Maxeke say to us today? What would she say to women who are graduates, middle class? What would she say to our women scholars? And what would you say to those women who already have the heritage and tradition of education? And I think that might be probably for us to say, this is a way in which this ritual, which I think is a wonderful ritual, that we remember the ancestors. Next time we will even pour libation, over these wonderful people and create an exciting thing, with flames and candles, and bring all the people who will show us that there is something about the ancestors and the soul of these ancestors. And these people who recognized, I think, things that are still a challenge to us. And they recognized one, which is the greatest challenge that we are facing, and I'm sure they will talk about it. And that is, how do we become inclusive in our society today? And they were believers in inclusivity. And secondly, how do we begin to think back of where most of us have come from? Many of you haven't come from, and that is the rural areas of this South Africa, which many of the young people do not know actually. They haven't grown up there. They do not know the culture. And they had an advantage of both the cultures of the urban as well as international, as well as the respect of those cultures. And I think we need to say, how do we begin to look at the values? The fear of God. These two people were great believers in inclusivity, and in equality of people, and worked on it and did things that were concrete. And today, when we talk of education and we talk of their love for young people, I said, what can we do for young girls today? And what would she have done with the large numbers of our teenage mothers? How do we support them to be able to live in this society? And what would she say to us to consider that the poorest people in this country are women? And the people who are heads of households today are women. And I was thinking in a simple thing, what would she say to us? Because she was also at that time an educated woman who had a very high profession, and by the standards of today, she would probably be having all the frills of our lives today, lifestyles and so on and all that, but she still had this care, the understanding that those people were also made in God's image and have a right to live a decent life. Thank you for my 5 minutes for now. Maybe it's longer than that, but old people.
Thank you so much, Mayor Dr. Baum. With those 5 minutes, we have learned what these two great giants shared: oral traditions, inclusivity, fear of God, equality, and many, many more. And I liked your question. We're going to come back to it, your suggested question. But right now, I'm going to start with you again, Dr. April Maduma, and 5 minutes. So we move to one of Mayor Maxeke's well-known quotes, which is, "Kill that spirit of self and do not live above your people, but live with them. If you can rise, bring someone with you." The concept of community to bring others up. How do we navigate our way back?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Program Director, for that question. Coming to that question, when one begins to think about Mama Maxeke's leadership qualities, and just to expand on the quote, to give it a bit of a context, that Maxeke would have said those words at the inaugural conference of the Council of African Women in 1937. That is where she was kind of inaugurated as the president of the Council of African Women. What was unique about the council was that it was a constellation of a range of initiatives by women throughout South Africa who had taken it upon themselves to care for the needs of their communities. So what one begins to see is that there was a pool of a generation of women who led in various capacities in their locales. So there is an example there that it's people who took the initiative to do something. One of the issues that was the highlight of that conference was the need to establish feeding schemes for schools. So those would be basic community needs that need the attention. Quite often, we look up to the government, and to be honest, government policies, they have cracks. It was that initiative of finding a space, creating a space actually, to do something about something that is lacking in society. So I think in going back to that question, it is about being in sync with one's reality, which I think that was one of the things that made it possible for Mama Maxeke's generation to be able to emerge and rise from very difficult conditions, to say, if our children are going to school hungry, there were no school feeding schemes, how do we go about ensuring that a child who comes from a family that does not have all the basic needs, how do we begin to see that there are also people they need to be nurtured? So for me, going back to that, it is about that one's kind of attunement to realities, you know. And also, when she says, kill the spirit of the self, that is the selflessness that we ought to be looking at, like in our own selves, that we do not live above, you know, other people. You know, that sense of what is good for me is also good for the next person. So I think those are the kind of values that we can, in our little ways, without us being too dramatic about them, but are practical things that can be done. And also, just in terms of, to summarize Mama Maxeke's legacy of service, I think quite often Maxeke is defined as someone who was a social worker. But when one follows Mama Maxeke's journey on becoming a social worker, she was appointed a social worker barely 3 years before her demise. Throughout her entire life, she was rendering services to communities, not as a paid social worker. Her appointment only came through Reynald Jones, barely 3 years before her passing. So that begins to show what we mean by selfless leadership, someone who identifies a need and try to kind of bridge that gap.
Thank you so much. And that shows, your last remark shows how selfless she was and how she lived up to the quote. Professor Maluleke, your thoughts on this quote?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think the context that my colleague has just painted for the quote is very, very important. Because if you don't realize that this quote was taken from a speech told to a hall full of women, you can miss the nuance of the meaning of that quote. Long before black consciousness came around, Charlotte Maxeke was aware that it was important for women to have their own space, to talk about issues that concerned them, to create a political platform for themselves. And that is the council which was launched in when she said these words. And I think we must remember that when she said these words, Nelson Mandela was 19 years old. Really? And when she died, he was 21.
Really?
So there is a kind of handing over that was not explicit and that was not overt between the two of them. But if you listen to this quote carefully, there are strong religious undertones to it. The idea of the self and the end of the quote about the golden rule, do unto others. All of these come from her very strong religious background. She was a missionary, after all. She went back home to her village to start a church, to build a school, and together with her church, built a school in Everton. So I know that some people debate whether she was more ANC than church person.
Yeah.
And I think it's a debate that she would find very amusing, because she was, of course, a very strongly religious person. And when you read this quote, you can see through the religious fervor that drove her, the person that she was. She also identifies in this very quote the problem of living above your people. Do not live above your people. Live with them. I wish that so many leaders would hear that.
Yes.
Because if you live above your people, you talk down at them.
Yes.
You look down upon them. You lose touch with who they are and where they are. Now, consider this. This very highly educated woman comes back from the USA, decorated, already imbued with all the knowledge, having fallen into that melting pot of ideas under the mentorship of the likes of W.E.B. Du Bois and others. She comes back, gets caught up in Cape Town because of the Anglo-Boer War. She's not able to travel, eventually goes back home to her village like her father, to live with the people, to build schools there, and to make a difference at that level. This, again, I think is a very, very important aspect. That's why she can say, don't live above your people, because she's talking from experience. She's done it herself. When she left England, she is quoted as having said something by a reviewer, one of the reviewers in England, in a very important publication, quoted a speech that she made before she left England. This is when she's 22. Just imagine, we're not talking about a 30-year-old woman at that time or even a 40-year-old woman, 22. She said, and I want to finish my 5 minutes with it, in that quote. She says to the English in general, because she was speaking, let us be in Africa even as we are in England. Here, we are treated as men and women. Yonder, we are but cattle. But in Africa, as in England, we are human. Can you not make your people of the Cape as kind and just as your people here? I'll stop here because it's a long quote. That's the Pan-Africanism coming out there already. At 22, she's aware not just of her village or her country, but the whole of Africa.
Thank you so much. Dr. Bao?
I'm sure the Institute has probably told South Africans, or it's already known, that one of the things that they are doing is to set up a school that will be named after her. I do not know, maybe there'll be time for them to tell us more when this school is going to be started, how much money the school needs, how much already has been raised on that. I'm sure since this is a celebration by the African National Congress, which is a government in power, this might be probably a time of doing it before it gets to be too late, because it's something that we need to do so that it is something concrete that we can see. You know, I want to say two things. I think something has happened to our women's movements. We have in this country a very large number of strong women's movements. South Africa is known. The church women's movements are the strongest in South Africa. They are highly organized, they are active, beautiful uniforms, and you know that they also contribute a lot of money towards the churches. So we are really the people who now we have to pay salaries, you know, of the poor pastors and things like that, which is fine. And then we also now have lots of strong women's movement on Stockvels. I'm not talking at this time about the institutions that were set up by government, because we now all depend on those institutions. But I'm talking about the base. But even with that kind of strength that we have as women, and the organization and the maintenance of it, and the commitment to it, which everybody knows, somehow the idea of us giving service as a women's institution or as anybody is just simply not there. There should be more of it, considering that we are only a country of 50 million people. That's very small if you compare us with a lot of other countries. So there must be a way in which this legacy, we find a way of motivating the young generation into this service idea rather than the dependence on government, on just about everything and everything. I just want to say the final one. Some people might not know, since I belong to this generation that is long gone, and I represent the living ancestors, so let's leave that for now. This country, prior to 1994, we had one of the largest numbers of what is called NGOs in South Africa. And the NGOs in South Africa were not funded by the government of South Africa. People don't know that. And it was these NGOs, these churches, he knows better, he was there, the South African Council of Churches, that were active in many parts of this country on all kinds of activities. And I think in order really to honor these people, let's also go back to that tradition and say, you know, we can still, even if we have the government, do also something in order to honor these leaders and care for our people. It is shameful that the poverty we are facing is to this extent. After 27 years, it is an embarrassment. It is a shame. We have gone back to old things. Malnutrition is bad. Some of you don't even know the word kwashiorkor because you've never heard of it. And we are at that. And yet, at the same time, if you begin to compare the lifestyles, there must be something that the legacy, this inspiration of a new discovery of each other's soul, a new discovery of another person, as he was saying, that we are all made, after all, in God's image. Our needs as human beings are the same. And I'm saying that And maybe occasions like this are wonderful occasions for us to make speeches and all that, and remind the young people and remind everybody else. I don't know who our listenership is, but I think we find another way also within these walls of these universities where the young people are. We're not going to go out there. We have to start where we are.
Thank you so much. That was a bit depressing.
It's real.
Yes, it is real, and we wish it was not real at all. And I know I'm very young compared to you, but I do remember the Kwashiorkor time.
You do?
Yes, I was very young then. I think I was about 5, 6 when that was happening. I'm not that young, like 22, like my Maxeke when she was in the UK. But just to come back to you, Dr. Bam, to come back to your question, and I will start with you this time. And thinking about the theme from the Charlotte Maxeke Institute, which is about bringing others up. What do you think Mandela and Maxeke will say to women today, like you have said, to women, to middle class? What would, especially when it comes to what we have just said, to the challenges, pressing issues that we face today? What do you think they will say? Thanks.
Ooh, that's a tall order. They would be very proud of us. They would be very proud of the great grandchildren who are acquiring higher education. They would be so pleased to know that we even have today women vice chancellors. And that today we also have, on a serious note, a lot of women who are in positions that traditionally were positions given to males. And so the numbers, they would be excited about the numbers in terms of representation. And they would ask us whether those women, like many of us who were in these positions, and many continue to be, what is it that we actually were doing? Or were influencing that institution as women? And I think that would be their first question they ask, is what is it, what role does it make? Or you simply follow what the men tell you, that this is a tradition of this institution, and so it has to be done like that. It has always been done like that. If you join our party, we are sorry, this is how it's done. That is one thing they would ask. And I think the second thing they would say to women, what is your new understanding today of motherhood? When we talk of motherhood as a concept, an idea of motherhood, bringing life to people, bringing lives to people, to the human beings, the soul, the being, are we still able to, as people brought up, I'm not talking about patriarchy. Let's remove that, because young feminists will be angry with me. I have to be very careful, because they don't like this nonsense of talking about motherhood. They said you must talk about parenthood, and I think they are right. So I won't go into that debate. I'll talk about parenthood next time. But for now, let's talk about motherhood. Because it's fundamental to me, and I don't make apologies on it. Is that unless, as we talk of parenthood, we also consider the power of women, which is a different kind of power, the power of bringing lives, the power of the responsibility of our psychic. I'm not saying men don't have the psychic, but it's a psychic given to us. How are we able to look at that today in a broader way rather than for self and child? And that's why I think, and people don't need, I'm not talking about the laws of society. We're not about the laws or the, let's also look and see a new discovery of self. a new discovery, not of identity in a different way. In the world of today, and we are all moving into technology where you will not even need human beings, with technology. There's going to come a stage for all of you in future that you don't need other human beings. But I'm not there yet. And I think that those are some of the big questions that we need to talk about and see how we all debate as we talk of the new society, the new world out there. Yes, we women, are we going to inherit this present world as women with all its values? Is there something that we are going to bring to the new world of human beings? The world, are people going to remain unequal as they are forever and ever? Or this is something that can never be? There will always be the poorest of the poor who die from hunger. And we accept that. And there will be those who will always be deprived of getting education. I mean, and so I think those are the questions to me, in addition to many other questions, that we need to raise.
Thank you. Prof?
Yeah, what would she say to women, and what would Madiba say to women today? Well, I think Sislope has already touched on very important things, I think, what could be said. One of the things that we have to remember is that in that quote that we were talking to earlier, even though Maxeke was talking to women, there is a line in that quote where she talks about living like brothers and sisters. So she was not, she didn't think of women, even though strategically it was important for women to stand apart and form themselves, as it were. She did not exclude men in many of the speeches that she was making. In 1922, I think, she wrote a letter to the newspaper Umthetheleli Wabantu, which letter I saw was the subject of debate in some newspaper not so long ago between Chigumadzi and Atambile. But in that letter, one of the things she says, so she wouldn't just speak to women, she would also speak to men. She describes the type of men that are necessary in the country. And I think it's important to look at that, the type of men leaders. So it's not good enough for us to keep focusing on what can women be and do and change, when in fact the problem is men.
Yes, it's true.
So she focuses on that. She says, and I quote her, "We want men to protect the women of their nation, not men who hurt and endanger women when they become aware of their rights." In other words, when women become aware of their rights, then the men want to hurt them. We don't want those kinds of men leaders. She goes on to say, "We want men who are the salvation of young girls, not sugar daddies, but men who are the salvation of young girls, and their nation can depend on their presence. We need men who will humble themselves so that the nation may lift them up to be the stars of Africa for the future generation." That's what Africa wants, and that's what the women of Africa are weeping and praying for. So already she was calling for a different kind of masculinity, a different kind of man, so that women are not always seen as the problem solvers. They are the problem, and therefore we must solve the problem by changing the behavior of women in one way or the other. The other thing, the last thing which I think she would have said, so you have these women vice-chancellors who are appointed. You have these women auditor generals. You have these women this and women that.
Including she's auditor
Now,
general, my favorite.
Now you have all of them, but I think Maxeke would chastise us and our media for the manner in which suddenly UNISA, has appointed a first woman vice chancellor. I mean, why are you congratulating UNISA and not the woman who has been appointed? Because it has taken UNISA 140 years to do it.
You, really? You?
The real achiever is the person who has been appointed, not the institution. Why are you appraising the Auditor General for appointing the first black woman? Why did it take them so long? It doesn't mean there were no black women who were capable of holding those positions, but they were simply not appointed. It doesn't mean that a woman could not have been the first president of the African National Congress. Charlotte Maxeke was available, willing and able, but she was not appointed. So I think she would chastise us for the manner in which we still take away the glory of women and give it to the very institutions that have kept them out for so long.
Interesting.
Very. Thank you, Prof. Doctor?
Yeah, just to add on what has already been said, I think Maxeke's thinking around leadership, that is what comes to mind to me now. Citing a moment where in 1937, I think, at the All African Convention, where she is invited to address the conference on the need to have voting rights extended to women. So I want to cite Maxeke's leadership around political leadership. And in that moment, Xuma invites Maxeke to the podium to address attendees and also citing her as an example of a woman leader who was ready and capable of acquiring voting rights. But what was unique about her at that time is that instead of accepting the role of an exceptional woman, Maxeke reorients the debate to say, we cannot be talking about the extension of voting rights to women at the time when majority of Africans did not have land. So it is that kind of quality of leadership that did not really bust in the kind of exception that, you know, when a woman excels, usually
She's an exception.
She's an exception. But Maxeke understood the fallacy of that. And for me, in that moment, she displayed leadership qualities in the sense that she even reorients the political debate around land and voting rights. That in that moment, she highlights the importance of understanding that to simply extend voting rights to women would not have been adequate at that time, for land was tied to voting rights. So for me, here is a kind of a leadership that really is required, that when we talk about women in leadership positions, it is not an exception, but someone that is not simply accepting the role of an exceptional woman, but also as someone who is able to speak truth to authority at times. Because for her to have been kind of invited to what would have been an association of leadership at that time, majority of whom would have been men, but she redefined that space to say there are other urgent issues that do not necessarily require politics of inclusion and incorporation, while there are other pressing issues. So for me, her shrewd political mind is kind of reflected in that moment. So we need that kind of exemplary leadership from women and society at large. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this conversation, and I can have it the whole day. But now I think I should give the chance to the audience members to ask some questions. And I think that we have so much to think about as well, especially when it comes to this question of bringing others up. What will be my role when it comes to bringing others up? So the first question that comes from the audience is, what has Mandela's generation taken from Maxeke's generation? This question is from Lali in Johannesburg. This is a very good question, Lali. Who do I start with? Professor Malulek.
Sure.
And the minister is also online to
Yeah.
answer.
What has Mandela's generation taken from Maxeke? I think that they took the courage, which is a scarce skill, by the way. I think it's more scarce than computer literacy at the moment. But I can see how courageous Maxeke was. As a young woman, what she did, the dreams she had and the dreams that she pursued, allowing no one and nothing to stand in front of her, and also doing what was unimaginable, as my colleague has said earlier. That sense of courage to define yourself, but also the courage to insert your own little story into the story of a nation and make it resonate with that story. You have seen that with Maxeke, and then you have seen that with generations after that. Your Mandelas, your Lembedes, your Tambos, your Ngois, all of them had that courage to define themselves and to define the future in the process.
Thank you. And I think I'm going to go to the minister to answer this question as well. What has Mandela's generation taken from Maxeke's generation? Minister?
Well, thanks for the contribution, great contribution made by your panel. For me, the first thing is radicalism, commitment to fundamentally change the state of human condition. Much has been said about the defiance campaign of the 50s, which by and large were made. Those men, what is not said is that they were, amongst others, influenced by Mayor Maxeke's own generation. The generation which defied the authorities, landed in jailed through mass action in Bloemfontein, Free State. And just to demonstrate this commitment and this devotion to radical change, when the first Secretary General of the ANC, Sol Plaatje, visited these women in jail, he felt for them because of the conditions they were living under. And he cried and he asked, what can he do to help them? Well, they explained to him that they are here because of the system, the past system, and there's little can help them on because whilst they are suffering in jail, if they are given a chance and go back to the community, they will continue where they ended. So for me, that's one very important lesson which Madiba and his generations learn. As you know, it's well documented, but the source thereof is not. Omar Gabashane, Omar Khotsi. That's the generation of Charlotte Maxeke, but also what the generation of Madiba, which I would say it's the ANC Youth League generation, which formed the ANC Youth League. What they learned is their steadfastness in the project of women's emancipation and committing themselves to that. And this is what they then taught generations which came after them, that it's not an act of charity, but it's a prerequisite for a success of any revolution. I'll end there, Prof.
Thank you, Minister. Now, we have a second question from Sipho in the Val, and I think I'm going to ask you to answer that one, Dr. Baum. The question is, why have we taken steps backwards in terms of exemplary leadership and emphasis on education?
Phew, backward steps. I'm not sure I can answer the question. I don't think I have the answer. But I think that the transition, and I'm not making an excuse. I think I'm not making an excuse. I think the transition has been very, very difficult, and none of the leadership, none of the people at the time were aware. By the time we took over from 1994, the society and the societies in general around the world were moving differently. So we kind of didn't have the time to say, now we are entering into this world of today, and we are still operating in a very peculiar way of dismantling the old structures. Now let me talk of something very simple which people may understand. When we took over, we did a research on simple things. How many schools in South Africa in rural areas didn't have running water, didn't have sanitation? I'm giving that as a concrete, simple example. Right, and then the numbers were very high. And the reason we had to do that research was because every South African in a rural area especially had to go to vote in a school. But when we created our laws were not in keeping with the kind of state we were in, because we were still highly structured differently. You know how we have, in terms of everything else. You know, I do not know what at least we experienced, and I don't want to talk about everybody, and take an example. We knew that the right thing to do is that every person must have an identity card. And we assumed that every South African has an identity card. What is even worse, we didn't know, we forgot that many South Africans of my generation didn't even have birth certificate. So when we started to draw up our laws, we were drawing our laws, though everything in our society is normal as it is in Sweden, in Germany, you know, or whatever was happening in the white world, in South Africa within itself. And so as we were trying to catch up, we were catching up already with a train that had left us, of many things, even in education, that is still today. And I think that and I know we're making, it sounds though I'm making excuses, because when we think of these things back, we should have known that we are living in a world that had very advanced things in education. Our schools very advanced already in urban areas. Our schools were urban areas, white schools were any standard in most countries of Europe. Where I was, and I visited, and I knew what was going on in those schools for many years. And we forgot, and so when we were doing a law, the law applies to everybody. And I think that is also one of the things that put us back. Training of teachers, which I'm not in education, but I'm thinking of more in education, of retraining a teacher who was not coming from what you don't know. There was something called Bantu education. The Bantu education was specially designed to be an inferior kind of education. And so, yes, we did away with it, but we were not quick enough to train people quickly enough to be able to fit into educational systems. So it sounds though like I am sort of making, we were so enthusiastic about being a country in the democratic world, also with the laws we were doing as a democratic nation. So we copied the best of all systems from everybody else. And I've never been asked that question, and it sounds so we're doing it. When I think, for instance, let me just, because only time I have to talk about it, you didn't ask about it, forgive me, I must get it out of my chest. If you look at our electoral system, we say to a party, give us anybody you like. We don't say the criteria. No. Give us anybody you like as a party. And then all we will do, we will vote for your party. Don't worry about the person you bring us. Whether the person is nice or not nice, or there's no criteria. We say, whether they've been in prison 7 times for stealing milk. Because all other countries do it like that, that you let the party decide. And then, of course, the party decides for us, and we say, thank you very much for giving us this wonderful leader. Okay, we will go ahead with him. It's usually him. Yes. For 10 years, yeah, we like him very much. And the second term comes, and you saw there's no space for us. No, we'll wait. And that's, now I'm being silly, but that's one of the grudges I have about the electoral system that put us into trouble in many ways. But so those what we need to, I'm not sure whether the people in education will know whether we have ever done an evaluation of our educational system, its strengths and its weaknesses. And the more I think of it, maybe we should, I don't know, maybe that was done, to say now, are we taking the same syllabus in schools? I don't belong to that world at all. The same syllabus in school that was taught, has this syllabus helped us to cultivate skills with young people? Or everybody was doing history, everybody was doing geography, that's fine. Everybody was doing whatever, and I have no idea, because that is not the area of re-evaluating the training of teachers, re-evaluating the syllabus in schools itself. That's not my area of, and so I think maybe we need to think it's not too late.
You've given us a lot to think about, and it's not excuses, but the explanation does make some sense, and that is something to think about. And by the way, the Bantu education is not very far off. I'm also a product of Bantu education.
Oh, are you really?
Yes,
You've done very well.
Thank you very much. The last question, we don't have much time, Dr. April Maduma. Is how can we return to the values of Ubuntu? From Anonymous.
Thank you for that question. I think the idea of returning is quite interesting in the sense that, for me, it raises a question about what is it that you're returning to. For me, Ubuntu itself, it's something that each generation has kind of its own conception of what it means. But I think what we can learn from the icons such as Tata Mandela and Charlotte Maxeke is that embracing humanity in totality.
Yeah.
And I think that is not prescriptive.
Yeah.
There is no template as to how to return. But I think acknowledging the need to embrace the principle that embrace humanity is important. And I think I'm just going to limit it at that it is something that begins to really force us to rethink our present, to say, what is it about the present conditions that we live in that kind of forces us to rethink the ideas that drive our society today? The materialism, the living above others, are in complete opposite to those values of Ubuntu. And by returning, I think to a large extent, it requires us to reorient ourselves around what it means to be human once again.
Thank you so much for those last remarks. And thank you to my panel members and to the minister and to the audience. I hope you have learnt a lot from this conversation. There is a lot more that we have to learn about when it comes to Mayor Maxeke and also Nelson Mandela, but I'm sure that you have gained a lot and you are going to make sure that you live to the theme, bring others up this year. Thank you. And now we have Mr. Thulasizwe Makhanya, who is the chairperson of the Charlotte Manye Maxeke Institute, who's going to give us the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Program Director, Prof. Mahango. I've been tasked to express our sincere gratitude on behalf of the Charlotte Manye Maxeke Institute and the family of Charlotte Maxeke. Ukudlulisa izibulelo. Greetings to the Vice Chancellor, Professor Tawana Kupe, and the entire family of University of Pretoria. Special greetings to our elderly, our living icon, Dr. Brigela Bam, who continues to inspire us. Greetings to Honorable Minister Nati Mthethwa Unyambose, Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, a department that is in the forefront of May Charlotte Maxeke's 150th year celebration and government program of action as declared by South African government that 2021 is the year of Charlotte Maxeke. Special greetings to all our viewers who had joined us through all our virtual platforms. Please allow me to say all protocol observed. Vice Chancellor, we are on a journey like the two icons that we're honoring today. We are committed and dedicated to the cause of the betterment of our people. The Charlotte Manye Maxeke Institute has made a call that has led to the creation of three pillars, namely education, empowerment, and legacy. As an institute, through these three pillars, we are promoting literacy, agricultural, and leadership. In education, both President Maxeke and President Mandela made their mark in the education space by not only getting educated, but most importantly, by establishing schools for our communities, especially poorest areas of our country. In empowerment, both these towering figures were bold in the space of empowerment, and especially for women, poor and vulnerable. Legacy of service, as per our theme today, both were selfless and strong, influenced by Ubuntu and Batupile principles. Both are unmatched when it comes to people's first beliefs, attitude, and agenda. To further highlight the values, teachings, and mission of Mayor Maxeke, the Institute created the theme of this year as declared by our government that it is the year of Charlotte Maxeke. Our theme is Bring Others Up, influenced by Mayor Maxeke's famous words when she said, "If you can rise, bring others up." This is our way of life and our oath that echoes and continue to inspire us every day. We call on you to join the movement to bring others up in whatever capacity you have in the community you live in. Sharing of skills, sharing of empowering words and opportunities. May we all be our neighbor's keeper in this year of Charlotte Maxeke and beyond. We are extending our hand to everyone to be part of our celebrations that will end on Mayor Maxeke's 151st birthday on the 7th of April 2022. Just to highlight the few events, Women of First was set for the month of August in 2021 this year. Launch of Charlotte Maxeke's documentary on the 16th of October 2021, a date of her passing. A day before the Friday, the 15th of October, we'll have what we call Charlotte Maxeke Fridays, where all the representatives in all international offices, embassies, government representatives, and public servants at all levels, and the public at large will have to wear Charlotte Maxeke merchandise. We implore you to make every Friday a Charlotte Maxeke Friday, where we dedicate ourselves to service and community involvement. The second one is Mothers of the Nation, in the month of November, which honors our mothers of nation like the one we have in the room, Mama Prekela Pam. We are closing the year with the bang, music and art festival in the month of December at Freedom Park in Pretoria. We further extend our hand to everyone to be part of our journey of going beyond just events and celebrations. We have a number of legacy projects in honor of our great grandmother, namely one, as Dr. Bam has alluded earlier on, Charlotte Maxeke Girls School of Excellence, which will compete with the best schools in the country, continent, and the world. Monuments to honor this icon in all spaces she had footprints on, from her place of birth in Eastern Cape, Blankwater, next to Fort Beaufort in Eastern Cape, to Butlogwa in Limpopo, where her family originated from, to Kliptown, Soweto, her last home. The other one is Women of First and Women Excellence Coffee Table Book to honor 150 women in line with the 150th celebration of May Maxeke. The Charlotte Manye Maxeke Institute and the family of May Maxeke appreciates everyone that has participated and everyone that has made this day a success. Thank you, Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Kupe. We look forward to a healthy working relationship with this historic university. Program Director, Professor Jane Mahangu from UP for leading this program. Ambassador Phoebe Potgieter Kubule, friend and close associate of CMMI and the GM of the African National Congress. Ms. Zuleika Patel, a student and author, our ambassador who is in the forefront in the preservation of May Maxeke's legacy. Mr. Sele Hatang of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Dr. Tozama April of Forte, a woman that is also a very close associate of CMMI and honored May Maxeke through a thesis. Professor Malulega of University of Pretoria, Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Honorable Natim Teto, for supporting our vision and taking the legacy projects and the name of May Maxeke to its rightful level. Board of Directors of Charlotte Manye Maxeke Institute and the three families that are involved and closely linked to our great-grandmother, Charlotte Maxeke. The Maxekes represented by Moketsi Maxeke, the Manyas represented by Auntie Olga Manya Sema, and the Makanyas that I'm here on behalf. UP staff, University of Pretoria staff, from Lynette, Primarashni, Emarias, Tembinkosi, and others who have played an important role in making sure that this day was a success. Thank you to all who have watched us online. Follow our work on our website, www.cmmi.org.za, on our social medias platform, and the hashtag, and hashtag us on hashtag Year of Charlotte Maxeke and hashtag Bring Others Up. We can, as an institute, we believe that we can create South Africa into the country we desire it to be. It is all up to us as individuals to build ourselves up so we can bring others up. We thank you and we look forward to continue this journey together.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, this is the end of our conversation today. I hope everyone stays warm and safe. Goodbye.